Hello and welcome. It's time to let the day dissolve, to let go of its concerns, its sharp edges, and its noise. It's time to settle in, to feel the weight of your body supported, to feel the gentle pull of comfort as you begin to drift. Your only task now is to breathe, in and out. Tonight, we are not going on a journey to one single place or to follow one single life. Instead, we are drifting back into the very atmosphere of a time long past, the medieval world. It is an era that we often paint in broad, simple strokes, a time of soaring faith, of knights in shining armor, of grand cathedrals. But beneath that simple image lies a world of profound and fascinating contradiction. It was a time of almost unimaginable structure, where every life had its place, every star had its meaning, and every law was handed down from God. And yet, it was also a time of deep, earthy, and chaotic absurdity, a time when logic, as we know it, seemed to take centuries-long naps. Tonight, we are going to explore that contradiction. We will drift through a world where rigid laws were created to manage the most unbelievable events, where the highest ideals of faith were shadowed by the most human and secret sins, and where the deepest paranoia of the court coexisted with the most absolute, unshakable loyalty. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to remember. Just allow my voice to be a guide, a gentle presence in the darkness as we wander the quiet, dusty corridors of the past. Let your mind drift on the stories or simply on the sound as you make your way toward a deep and restful sleep. Our journey begins not in a grand throne room or on a bloody battlefield, but in a humble courtroom, in a small French town where a most unusual defendant is about to make history. Imagine yourself for a moment in the French town of Falaise. The year is 1386. The air in the courtroom is heavy, not with the scent of polished wood and paper, but with the smell of damp stone, unwashed wool, and the faint, earthy tang of the street outside. The room is packed with serious-looking men, their faces stern and composed, as if they are pretending this is all perfectly normal. There are judges, robed and solemn. There are witnesses, ready to give their testimony. And there, in the defendant's position, is the accused. It is a pig. The creature is a sow, an ordinary farm animal, nameless, and very likely just hungry on that fateful morning. It has been chained and formally charged. The crime, as the court understands it, is murder. The pig, wandering the street, had attacked a child. It was a tragic event, absolutely. But this was an era where the rhythms of life and death, even farm life, were seen through a different lens. Instead of simply shrugging off the incident as a grim reality of coexisting with livestock, the townsfolk decided to apply the full, solemn weight of human law. And so, the pig stood trial, a full trial. The charge was read, accusing the animal of acting with malice aforethought. If this were true, it would, of course, make this sow one of the most intelligent pigs in recorded history. But in the medieval mind, everything in God's creation, even a pig, existed within a moral ecosystem. And if that ecosystem went rogue, someone or something had to answer for it. An attorney was assigned to the pig. We can only imagine his task, perhaps the most awkward gig in legal history. We can picture him standing before the jury, perhaps arguing that his client was merely following its nature. Or, as the narrator suggests, declaring, "My client oinks in protest." The judge listened to the arguments, nodding gravely. The witnesses presented their facts, and then the verdict was delivered. Guilty. The court, in its wisdom, declared the sow guilty because, as the logic went, pigs were notorious repeat offenders. The punishment was to be death by hanging, the same method used for human criminals. Consistency, it seems, was paramount in jurisprudence. And so, the town gathered for the execution. This was a public event, a spectacle. The pig was reportedly dressed in human clothes, a shirt, breeches and all, before being led to the gallows. In front of an enthusiastic crowd, the sentence was carried out. Nothing, perhaps, says civilization quite like the public execution of farm animals. The trial of the fillet pig was not just a local curiosity. It caused a significant stir. It seems people had begun executing their livestock without the proper channels, and this was a problem. The Bishop of Fillet had to intervene. The result was a new law born from this one unbelievable event. It was decreed that no animal could be tried or executed without ecclesiastical authorization. In other words, even the farm animals now needed permission from God's middle management before they could be brought to justice. This precedent stuck. Soon, Europe was filled with reports of criminal animals. Roosters tried for witchcraft, goats accused of immorality, cows fined for trespassing. Humanity, it seemed, had reached peak accountability. It is easy for us to laugh from the comfort of our modern beds, but for the people of Falaise, this was a serious matter. It was an attempt to impose human order on a chaotic world, to find reason and justice even in a random, tragic act. Unfortunately for the pig, that justice was final, and as the town returned to its daily rhythms, a new law was entered into the books, a permanent reminder of the day logic, law, and livestock collided in the most unfortunate way. If there is one thing the medieval era excelled at, besides inventing unnecessary laws, it was taking a joke just a little too far. Let us drift now from the somber courtroom in France to the fields of 14th century Bohemia. Imagine the sound of a tournament, the thunder of hooves, the splintering of lances, the roar of the crowd. For a bored nobleman, these events had become repetitive. The same horses, the same lances, the same concussions. And so, this nobleman, whose name is lost to time, decided to show up to a joust with something new, something no one expected. A goose. Not a roasted goose for the feast, nor a pet goose on a leash. This was a fully armored goose. Local chronicles tell us that the knight had commissioned a tiny, custom set of plate armor for the bird, complete with a miniature helmet. He proudly declared the goose to be his squire, parading it around the tilt yard. He even gave it a title, Sir Hiss of the Pond. It was meant to be a moment of levity, a witty satire on the seriousness of the joust. It was, as the narrator says, supposed to be funny, until it wasn't. During the event, the goose, perhaps not appreciating the joke, apparently escaped. It went flapping across the field, a blur of feathers and polished metal. A real squire tried to grab it, and the goose bit him on the hand. Then, in a final act of chaotic bravery, it rammed into the legs of a passing warhorse. The horse, a massive animal trained for battle but not for armored fowl, panicked. It threw its rider and chaos erupted. By the time the dust settled, 3 knights were injured, a goose was dead, and everyone had learned a valuable lesson. Birds make terrible armor bearers. Naturally, instead of just laughing it off as a prank gone wrong, the authorities reacted in the only way the medieval mind knew how. They legislated it. A new decree was issued. It explicitly banned the dressing, arming, or mounting of animals in imitation of noble combatants. The ruling, with all the seriousness of a royal edict, also extended to beasts of burden, fowl, and pets of domestic origin. It was, in short, the official legal Latin for "don't give your chicken a sword." The law remained on the books for decades. We can imagine future generations of scribes and lawyers reading it, utterly confused, wondering what great catastrophe could have possibly inspired such a specific and bizarre prohibition. The answer, of course, was one very determined goose and one knight with far too much time on his hands. Now, let us travel south to medieval Germany, to another tournament, this one clouded by a different kind of excess. The year is 1364. A nobleman named Count Heinrich von Schwarzburg arrives at a jousting tournament absolutely plastered. This, in itself, was not unusual. Knights were expected to drink. Medieval water, after all, could often be more dangerous than the tournament itself. But Count Heinrich took it a step further. He insisted loudly that he fought better while spiritually fortified. Accounts of the day say he entered the arena swaying in his saddle. He dropped his 14-foot lance 3 times before he could even begin his charge. Still, he shouted, "Let the glory of Saint Michael guide my aim." Seconds later, he thundered down the field. He missed his opponent entirely. Instead, he impaled a nearby monk who had been standing on the sidelines praying for everyone's safety. It was a moment of dark, poetic irony. The scandal was immediate. The crowd was perhaps entertained, but the church was horrified. Miraculously, the monk survived, though it's reported he spent the rest of his life avoiding outdoor events. The local duke, fearing this might turn into another animal trial situation, called an emergency council. The result was yet another brand new law, born of a single chaotic incident. No knight shall compete in tournament or trial of arms while under the influence of drink or fermented brew. It was, in effect, Europe's first recorded anti-drunk driving regulation, except the vehicles were war horses and the airbags were monks. This law, the Drunken Joust Decree, became official throughout the Holy Roman Empire. It didn't stop knights from drinking, of course. It just made them more creative about hiding it. And so, one inebriated noble turned medieval chivalry into a cautionary tale, proof that even in full plate armor, stupidity always finds a way. From the spectacular chaos of the joust, let our minds drift to something quieter, more fundamental to the rhythm of medieval life. Let's imagine the smell of a 14th century London bakery in the early morning. The warmth of the ovens, the comforting scent of yeast and baked grain. In medieval England, bread wasn't just food. It was politics you could eat. Every loaf, every crust, every crumb was regulated by law. Bakers had to follow the assize of bread and ale, a powerful regulation that dictated the precise size, weight, and price of every loaf, down to the ounce. It was a system designed to ensure fairness and prevent bakers from cheating the populace. But the law was very specific. It dictated weight and price. It said nothing about shape. Until, that is, one ambitious baker ruined it for everyone. Sometime in the 14th century, a baker in London decided to show off. Perhaps he was bored with the endless sameness of his loaves. Perhaps he just wanted a little attention. Whatever his motive, he baked a beautiful round loaf, and to make it special, he embossed it with a decorative ring around the top. Unfortunately for him, that decorative ring looked exactly like the king's crown. The loaf was an immediate hit at the market. People started calling it the royal bread. One customer, perhaps unwisely, joked that it looked fit for His Majesty's table. In a society where sarcasm, especially directed at the crown, could be a capital offense, that comment was enough to start an inquest. Word eventually reached a royal official. He took one look at the bread and decided that treason had officially entered the bakery. The poor baker was dragged before a magistrate. The charge was as creative as the bread itself, mocking the image and authority of the crown through insolent baking. The baker was fined heavily, and as a final humiliation, he was forced to stand in the public stocks with his offending bread tied around his neck. It was, quite possibly, the first known case of public carb shaming. To prevent any future bread-based blasphemy, Parliament was forced to act. A new regulation was issued. No loaf, it declared, was to bear royal or sacred resemblance in shape or design.
Bake all you want, but don't get artistic. Creativity was now officially a crime.
It sounds ridiculous to us, but medieval rulers lived in fear of symbolic rebellion. A commoner couldn't criticize the king directly, but they could mock him in pastry form. And nothing scared those in power quite like the idea that the common folk might find humor in their divine authority.
And so, one overly decorative loaf of bread gave birth to the first anti-satire law in English culinary history. The moral was clear. In medieval Europe, never let your food look smarter than your king.
Now, let us leave the warm bakery and travel to a place of supposed silence and discipline, a 14th century Italian monastery. Imagine the life of a monk. It was one of devotion, silence, and chanting. The Gregorian hymns were the soundtrack of their lives, repetitive, slow, and depressingly holy. But a group of Benedictine monks decided their chanting needed a little more passion. One night, a particularly creative monk, and historians suspect wine was involved, slipped in a few new verses. These verses were not from Scripture. They were borrowed from a popular tavern tune about a maiden fair and faithless. The new rhythm caught on. Soon, half the abbey was humming it between prayers. The abbot, at first, tried to ignore it. But then one morning, he caught two monks rehearsing harmonies in the cloister. Worse, they had given their new composition a name, the Song of Saint Cecilia's Eyes. The situation escalated. Vespers, the evening prayer, became a nightly concert. The brothers began sneaking instruments into the chapel, a lute here, a small drum there. The final straw came when one monk brought in a tambourine. The abbot snapped. He summoned the entire choir, gave a fiery sermon about temptation, and announced a new immediate rule that would go down in monastic history. No singing or musical performance shall occur after the hour of sunset. It was, in effect, the world's first medieval noise complaint. The monks were furious. They argued that their music brought them closer to God. The abbot replied that God probably preferred silence. The band survived for centuries, long after the abbey itself had turned to ruin. The irony, of course, is that those same rebellious monks had accidentally invented an early form of polyphony, the very musical foundation of European choral art. And so, even in the most sacred of spaces, a single spirited incident led to a new law, silence and creativity, all because even holiness apparently had a bedtime. We have seen how medieval law scrambled to manage the behavior of people and animals. But the medieval mind also saw agency and even malice in the inanimate world. Let us drift now to 15th century England, to a grand estate owned by a nobleman named Lord Humphrey of Catterick. Lord Humphrey owned several horses, a large home, and a disturbingly personal relationship with his carp pond. These weren't just any fish to him. He had named them. He fed them by hand. And, according to one account, he even spoke to them, as one might counsel loyal servants. He was, in short, very attached to his carp. So, one afternoon, following a large village festival, he was horrified to see his prized carp swimming erratically. He immediately assumed the worst.
The villagers, he claimed, had poured ale into his pond. And not just any ale, his ale.
He demanded an immediate inquiry.
The local reeve, the chief magistrate of the village, was summoned. We can imagine him arriving at the pond, sighing inwardly, as the nobleman pointed frantically at the fish. The reeve dutifully poked at the carp with a long stick. He observed them for a time, and then he delivered his official report. The fish did, in fact, appear uncommonly jolly.
That was all Lord Humphrey needed to hear. He declared it an act of sabotage and summoned the village elders for questioning. Their defense was simple and honest. We were drunk, they admitted, not the fish.
This defense, naturally, did not fly. The nobleman ordered a full court proceeding, and, as expected, the court found the peasants guilty of the willful inebriation of aquatic life. The punishment was threefold: a heavy fine, the complete draining of the pond for purification, and, because medieval justice loved its paperwork, the creation of a new ordinance. "Let no man or woman," the law read, "pour ale, wine, or spirituous drink into waters wherein swim the creatures of the Lord." And thus was born the law of drunken fish. This regulation, as absurd as it sounds, actually spread to neighboring estates, mostly because other lords didn't want their ponds to become the subject of a parliamentary emergency. It became legal shorthand for "don't waste alcohol on animals," which, to be fair, is probably good advice. The best part? A later chronicler, looking back at the incident, noted that the fish had been perfectly fine. They had simply been sluggish from the summer heat. An entire law, a court case, and a hefty fine were all based on one man's misinterpretation of fish behavior. Now, let us leave the quiet pond and travel to the bustling French town of Autun in the year 1324. The town had just commissioned a massive, beautiful, and absurdly over-decorated bronze bell for its new church tower. This was the kind of bell that screamed, "Our parish has money." On the day of its grand unveiling, the entire town gathered. Priests blessed it, nobles nodded approvingly, children stared in awe. Then came the test ring. A few moments later, disaster struck. A storm rolled in from nowhere. Thunder roared, and a bolt of lightning hit the tower directly. The massive bell, weighing thousands of pounds, broke loose from its beam. It crashed through the wooden floor of the belfry and rolled down the church steps like a divine bowling ball. Witnesses swore it moved with purpose. It crushed barrels, chickens, and at least one unlucky bench before finally lodging itself in a fruit cart. When the dust settled, the mayor, looking at the devastation, declared quite seriously that the bell had fled from its sacred duty. And in medieval France, a misbehaving object meant one thing: a new law had to be made. The town council issued a decree. All church bells, it stated, shall henceforth be bound with chains or cords to prevent ungodly flight. And thus was born the law of runaway bells. Local blacksmiths were immediately put to work, bolting and chaining every bell in town. Priests held special blessings to ensure no more bell rebellion. By the late 14th century, this trend had spread. Some cathedrals chained their bells so tightly they could barely ring at all, leading to new complaints that God might not be able to hear them properly. Decades later, travelers still told the tale of the Autun bell that tried to escape judgment. It became a cautionary legend, a reminder that in the Middle Ages, even inanimate objects were not safe from blame, because in medieval logic, even metal needed supervision. As our journey continues, we find the law stretching its reach into matters of faith, honor, and even basic modesty. Let's imagine a tavern in the 12th century Kingdom of Castile. The air is thick with smoke and the murmur of conversation. A priest, Father Rodrigo de Var, is locked in a heated theological debate with a knight. The topic, as one might expect after 5 pints of monastery ale, is whether Saint Michael could defeat a mortal warrior in single combat.
It started as harmless pub theology, but pride was the currency of the Middle Ages, and neither man could back down. The knight, losing his patience, called Father Rodrigo a coward in cloth. Rodrigo, filled with holy or perhaps fermented spirit, replied, "May God strike you down, or failing that, I shall." The next morning, both men showed up in a field outside town. The knight arrived in full armor, carrying a lance. Father Rodrigo arrived in his robes, clutching a sword that reportedly still had candle wax on it. Witnesses claimed that before the duel began, Rodrigo calmly blessed himself, perhaps history's most confident flex. Against all logic and all odds, the priest, with a lucky swing, managed to disarm the knight. The crowd erupted in cheers. The church, however, did not. When word reached the local bishop, he nearly had a stroke. A priest defeating a knight in a formal trial by combat was unthinkable. Not because it was sinful necessarily, but because it was deeply embarrassing. The bishop feared it would set a terrible precedent, encouraging clergy to settle their arguments with swords rather than scripture. Within a week, an emergency council was convened in Toledo. The ruling was swift and clear. No servant of God, it declared, shall henceforth bear arms, nor engage in duel, tory, or violent sport. And just like that, the clergy combat ban was born. It was the medieval church's version of an HR memo saying, "Please stop fighting your co-workers." Of course, enforcement was spotty. The warrior monks of the Templars probably laughed while polishing their swords. But for ordinary priests, the message was clear. The next time someone called them a coward, they would simply have to mutter, "I'd smite you, but canon law forbids it." One drunken duel had, in an instant, forever separated the clergy from the chivalry. Now let us leave the dusty fields of Castile and drift to the 15th century city of Prague. Imagine a brutally hot summer day. The air is thick and still. A craftsman, a carpenter named Marek the Builder, is repairing a section of the city wall. The sun is relentless. The work is hard. And Marek, deciding that modesty was optional, stripped off everything but his work boots. He continued his work, hammering away like Adam with a hammer. By mid-morning, this spectacle had drawn quite an audience. Unfortunately for Marek, that audience included a royal procession passing through the city gate. Among the onlookers was Queen Barbara of Scilly, who was, reportedly, not amused. Accounts differ on what shocked her more, the nudity itself, or the enthusiasm with which Marek waved his mallet in greeting. By evening, the entire city of Prague was buzzing with the news. A naked man had labored before the queen. The city council convened immediately. There were serious discussions about morality, public decency, and the inherent dangers of distracting royalty with unsolicited anatomy. The verdict was unanimous. Something had to be done. Thus, the council introduced the Naked Carpenter Ordinance. This new law declared that no man or artisan shall ply his trade unclothed within sight of Her Majesty or the public square. Marek was fined and publicly lectured. To prevent any future offenses, guild masters across the city were forced to add a clause to their codes requiring appropriate attire during labor. And just like that, one very sweaty carpenter gave birth to medieval Europe's first recorded workplace dress code. The story spread, and other towns followed suit, enacting their own modesty laws. Centuries later, the ordinance technically remained on the books. It stood as an eternal warning that in medieval bureaucracy, even public embarrassment was a legislative event. And from that day on, every craftsman in Prague worked fully clothed. Not because it was practical, but because one man couldn't keep his hammer to himself. We've seen laws born of chaos, excess, and embarrassment. But the medieval legal system also grappled with forces that lay beyond the realm of the rational. Forces they perceived as supernatural, demonic, or simply unnatural. Let us travel to the Swiss city of Basel in the year 1474. Basel was a place where people took law, order, and their poultry very, very seriously. One morning, a farmer reported an event that was, strictly speaking, not possible. His rooster, he claimed, had laid an egg. Rather than celebrating this as some kind of miracle, or perhaps just dismissing it as a biological anomaly, the townsfolk reacted with their usual calm restraint. They accused the bird of witchcraft. The news spread like fire. Crowds gathered, debating whether the egg was the work of the devil. A few suggested it might just be a malformed yolk, but others whispered that demons were now breeding poultry. Eventually, someone decided that the only logical solution was a trial. So, the rooster was formally arrested, confined to a small wooden cage, and charged with unnatural production. A public defender was appointed, a gesture that, in hindsight, feels particularly optimistic. The trial drew hundreds of spectators. The judge, presumably with a straight face, solemnly listened as witnesses swore they had seen the egg with their own eyes. They also testified that the bird had appeared deeply unrepentant. The defense lawyer argued, quite reasonably, that the rooster, being an animal, lacked moral agency. The prosecution countered that Satan often worked through beasts. The judge nodded, perhaps regretting his career choices, and declared the rooster guilty. The sentence was death by fire. On execution day, the people of Basel gathered in the square. A pyre was built. The rooster was placed atop it, and the cursed egg was burned alongside it. Chroniclers of the day note that many cheered, others prayed, and at least one merchant sold roasted nuts nearby, proving that capitalism never misses an opportunity. After the ashes had cooled, the Basel City Council passed a new ordinance, just to be safe. No citizen, it read, shall bring forth claims of infernal poultry without clerical witness. In short, you could still accuse your chicken of witchcraft, but only if a priest signed off on it first. Bureaucracy, once again, triumphed. Historians, of course, later concluded that the egg was likely just an undeveloped mass of tissue, a common biological occurrence. But by then, the legend was set in stone. Now, let us leave the unfortunate rooster and drift south to 14th century Florence, a city of art, ambition, and, apparently, haunted shoes. A local cobbler named Giovanni da Rossi was known for his exceptional craftsmanship. His boots were sturdy, his slippers elegant. One evening, a nobleman stormed into Giovanni's shop, furious. He claimed that a pair of boots he had purchased the week before had walked on their own. Naturally, Giovanni laughed, until the nobleman produced witnesses. 3 of the nobleman's servants swore they had seen the boots march across the floor completely unaided in the middle of the night. One even claimed the boots clicked in rhythm as though dancing to invisible music. Within days, the entire neighborhood was convinced the devil had taken up cobbling. People began inspecting their own shoes for signs of possession. Giovanni's business, once booming, collapsed overnight. Desperate to prove his innocence, Giovanni called for an official investigation. Because, of course, nothing clears your name like a medieval trial about haunted footwear. The city magistrates,
taking the matter with complete seriousness, summoned theologians, blacksmiths, and even a tailor to testify. After much debate, the council ruled that no proof of demonic activity could be found. But to prevent any future supernatural shoemaking, they drafted yet another new regulation. No craftsman, the law stated, shall enchant, curse, or otherwise imbue apparel with motion unnatural to its purpose. And so the law of haunted shoes was born. The truth, it turned out, was far simpler. The nobleman's servants later admitted that one of them had moved the boots as a prank, and the others had joined in for fun. By the time they confessed, however, the law was already carved into the city's records. It remained there for centuries, a reminder that when superstition met government, even your shoes could end up on trial. We have seen the medieval world attempt to legislate animals, objects, and even the supernatural. It seems only fitting that in their quest for ultimate order, they would eventually turn their legal minds to the divine itself. Our journey takes us now to 14th century France, to a small, quiet village near Limoges. Etienne Dubois, he returns from Mass one morning, breathless, gathering his neighbors. He claims to have witnessed a sign from God. His cow, he swears, his ordinary cow, had begun weeping during the sermon. Real tears. It was, he declared, a message of compassion and repentance. His neighbors, caught up in the fervor, agreed. The local priest, however, did not. Within days, the village was transformed. Pilgrims flooded in, eager to see the weeping cow. Merchants, sensing opportunity, set up stalls selling food and trinkets. Someone even started selling holy milk in small clay jars. The priest, seeing his parish turn into a theological farmer's market, begged the bishop to intervene. The bishop arrived, skeptical but curious. He inspected the cow, he prayed over it, he waited. Nothing. Then, after a few awkward minutes of silence, the cow blinked and let out a single tear. The crowd gasped. The bishop frowned. This, he declared, requires verification. And so a tribunal was convened, not to investigate a sin, but to investigate a miracle. For 3 days, the church council investigated. They interviewed Etienne, the cow's owner. They interviewed the local cheesemaker. They even interviewed a deeply confused veterinarian. After 3 days of deliberation, the church concluded that while the event was certainly impressive, it ultimately lacked sufficient spiritual merit to be considered divine. The miracle was officially rejected. And to prevent any future bovine blasphemy, the diocese issued an official decree. Let no miracle be proclaimed, it read, without episcopal examination, lest false wonders lead the faithful astray. And so, the law of unapproved miracles was born. Overnight, spontaneous holiness became a regulated industry. Anyone claiming to have witnessed a miracle, a bleeding statue, a glowing loaf of bread, an unusually polite sheep, now had to file for approval. Unsanctioned wonder-working was punishable by fines, penance, or worst of all, paperwork. Miracles, of course, didn't stop. They just got quieter. Peasants whispered about glowing crucifixes in secret, praying their saints wouldn't do anything too noticeable and attract the attention of the auditors. As for Etienne's cow, she was declared blessed but not miraculous and lived out her days in peace, or perhaps mild confusion. This endless, obsessive desire for order, this need to document and legislate every aspect of existence, from the shape of bread to the tears of a cow, from drunken jousters to runaway bells, it paints a picture of a world desperate for structure, a world that believed, perhaps needed to believe, that everything could be managed, categorized, and controlled by human law. But as we drift away from the public ledger and the law book, we find that beneath this rigid surface of order, a very different world existed. A world of shadows, whispers, and profound hidden disorder. A world where power was not held by laws, but by secrets. Let us leave behind the brightly lit, if slightly absurd, world of public law and drift into the torchlit shadows of the medieval court. Here, the rules are unwritten, and survival depends not on what is decreed, but on what is concealed. We are entering the realm of poison. In the high courts of medieval Europe, power was a delicate, fragile thing, an illusion built on alliances, smiles, and secrets. Kings ruled by the sword, yes, but those who truly survived, those who endured, learned to kill without ever unsheathing a blade. Poison became the invisible hand that shaped dynasties. It was the whispered alternative to open rebellion. It was cleaner than bloodshed, quieter than a dagger in the night, and infinitely more terrifying. A single drop of toxin, administered at the right moment, could decide the fate of an entire kingdom before the first soldier had even buckled his armor. The great hall is filled with laughter and music. Roasted pheasants and spiced wine are served on silver platters. But beneath the celebration, danger is served alongside every dish. Nobles laugh and raise their goblets and toasts, but every sip is taken with a quiet, almost imperceptible hesitation. In this world, trust has been replaced by paranoia. People didn't just fear their enemies, they feared their friends, their cooks, their wives. A courteous offer of wine could be a death sentence. A shared meal becomes an act of mutual suspicion. The most powerful lords employed tasters, men whose only purpose, whose entire career, was to die first if the food was tainted. Some of these men survived for years, their senses honed by terror. Others lasted only a single night. To the ambitious, poison was the perfect weapon. It left no witnesses, only rumors. It killed kings without the mess of rebellion, silenced rivals without the cost of war, and erased inconvenient heirs without a hint of scandal. Its very presence transformed the etiquette of court life. The most innocent gestures became rituals of danger. Kissing a noble's hand, biting into a piece of fruit, accepting a shared goblet, all were fraught with hidden meaning. Women wore perfume that could be laced with toxins. Noblemen carried rings with hidden needles. Even rosaries, the very symbols of faith, were rumored to conceal deadly dusts. Poison was more than a weapon. It was a language. In an era where a careless word could be fatal, poison spoke in absolute silence. A duke's sudden illness, a queen's pale complexion, a slow, wasting death that was mistaken for divine punishment. All of these were coded messages, silent warnings from those who ruled from behind the curtains. The Middle Ages were an age of faith and fear, of gold and guilt. And behind every jeweled goblet, behind every glittering feast, lurked a single chilling question that quieted even the bravest hearts. Who will drink first? This pervasive, silent fear did not spring from nowhere. It was cultivated. It was crafted, with the same precision as medicine, in the quiet, dim shops of the medieval world. Let us drift now, away from the banquet hall, and follow the scent of herbs and chemicals down a narrow, shadowed street. We arrive at the shop of the apothecary. This is where the fear begins. Imagine stepping inside. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of dried herbs, exotic oils, and something else, something darker, more metallic. To the public, these men and women were healers.
They prepared ointments for burns, tonics for sleepless mobiles, and remedies for the ague. But behind locked doors, they mixed death. Here, the line between science and sorcery was impossibly thin. On the shelves, rows and rows of glass jars glint in the candlelight. They contain nightshade, belladonna, hemlock, and mercury. All perfectly legal, all part of the pharmacopoeia, all perfectly useful in the right hands, and utterly damning in the wrong ones. These apothecaries were not simple shopkeepers. Many were serious students, poring over old Greek and Arabic texts, blending the wisdom of Hippocrates with whispered secrets from Persia and Egypt. They were the quiet alchemists of power. They spoke of philosophical poisons. These were not crude toxins that killed in moments. They were concoctions designed to kill slowly, beautifully, and without leaving a trace. A few grains too many could silence a bishop. A drop too few could let him live long enough to denounce his murderer. Royal courts coveted them, feared them, and punished them in equal measure. A good apothecary could make a prince sleep forever. Yet that same man could be burned as a heretic if his concoctions ever turned against the crown. Their workrooms were dim and damp. By candlelight, you would see them at their work. Pestles grinding powders of crushed pearls, snake venom, and arsenic into lethal dusts. They tested their mixtures meticulously on rats, on dogs, and sometimes on prisoners. When a concoction worked as intended, they gave it an elegant, harmless name, aqua tofana, venomous, or simply the blessed water. In truth, they were curses disguised as cures. And yet, amid all the death, there was a strange fascination. Even kings admired their precision. The apothecary represented the very edge of human control over nature, the power to decide who would live and who would die, all without lifting a single blade. To the devout, it was the gravest of sins. To the ambitious, it was genius. Every vial on these shelves held a story. Every powder held a secret. And when the scent of rosemary and sage drifted through the stone corridors of a castle, even the most faithful courtier would pause and pray it wasn't hiding something bitter underneath. This quiet, refined art of the apothecary found its most potent wielders not among soldiers or kings, but among those who had to navigate the treacherous currents of the court with no army at their back. If poison had a patron saint, it would have been a queen. In a world ruled by men and sharpened steel, royal women discovered that the deadliest power came not from muscle, but from subtlety. Their weapons were not swords or armies. Their weapons were goblets, cosmetics, and whispered smiles. When your marriage is a political alliance and betrayal means survival, the cup in your hand becomes as dangerous as the crown on your head. The great courts of Europe were stages. They were elaborate performances of power, and queens learned to act beautifully while plotting silently. Rumors, those powerful cousins of fact, swirled around the most powerful women. In England, it was claimed that the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine dined in fear, that her rivals grew pale and sick after sharing her table. Whether it was true or not scarcely mattered. In the Middle Ages, belief was as potent as any venom. But it was across the Alps, in the glittering, cutthroat courts of Italy, that the art was perfected. Here, the Borgias became legend. Let us imagine Lucrezia Borgia, daughter of Pope Alexander VI. Her reputation became so stained by rumor that her name alone came to mean treachery wrapped in silk. It was said that Lucretia wore a special ring, a masterpiece of deadly artistry. It had a hidden compartment, concealed beneath a rotating gemstone.
A single subtle twist could release a drop of poison into a cup as she passed it, or onto her own fingertip, offered in a seemingly harmless greeting. One sip, one kiss, and a man might begin to cough his last confession. Whether she truly used this ring, or if it was even real, mattered little. Fear itself was power, and Lucretia wielded it masterfully. Other women followed this example, in fact or in rumor. Queens in France and Spain learned to command their own apothecaries, demanding mixtures that could soften a husband's temper or erase him entirely. This silent game was played by lovers, courtiers, and even nuns. The same merchants who sold love potions to desperate women also supplied assassins. Many pretended to seek affection when, in truth, they sought freedom. The risk, of course, was enormous. If caught, even royal blood could not wash away the stain of this particular kind of murder. A queen could trade her crown for a noose, her beauty for eternal infamy. But in a time when every alliance was fragile, when men held the sword and the throne, these women found their own rebellion in secrecy. They found their power not in the law, but in the vial. They found it in the shimmering, uncertain depths of a jeweled cup. The art of poisoning, as practiced in the medieval era, relied on one crucial element: deception. It was an art of taste, texture, and, above all, timing. A deadly meal in the Middle Ages did not look suspicious. It looked delicious. The grand feasts with their complex flavors were the perfect camouflage. Honey-glazed meats, strongly spiced sauces, heavy imported wines, and candied fruits from distant lands, all of these provided the perfect mask for a lethal dose. A poison was tasteless to the careless diner, but a master assassin could make it part of the flavor profile itself. The heavy use of cinnamon, for instance, could easily mask the metallic tang of arsenic. A dark, rich wine could hide the bitterness of belladonna, and a thick, savory soup could carry death as easily as it carried salt. At royal tables, food became theater. The kitchen was both a laboratory and a battlefield. Cooks were interrogated before banquets. Tasters, as we know, were summoned like priests before a sacrament. The first bite of every dish was a small, quiet act of courage. Some courts even introduced elaborate rituals to combat the fear. The host might eat from every single dish first, in full view of the guests. Or servants would perform mock tastings, all to display loyalty and safety. And still, people died. When they did, the symptoms, vomiting, seizures, fever, delirium, were often blamed on other things. Divine punishment, bad humors, a sudden sickness of the soul. Few understood the science of toxicology. Even fewer dared to voice their suspicions aloud. The poisoners, however, understood everything. They knew that timing mattered even more than the dose. A poison that killed too quickly was amateurish. It created suspicion, panic. A poison that killed too slowly, on the other hand, might allow the target to flee, to recover, or to find an antidote. The ideal poisoner aimed for elegance, death after a day, or perhaps two, just enough time for rumors to grow, for the victim's enemies to make mistakes, and for the poisoner to be long gone. Chronic poisons were especially admired. Small, repeated doses of mercury, antimony, or lead. These could mimic a natural illness for weeks, even months, before killing cleanly. These slow deaths fooled even the best physicians, who would often prescribe remedies that only worsened the condition, or sometimes even contained more of the very substance that was killing their patient. One of the most notorious examples was the infamous aqua tofana. It was a colorless, tasteless concoction made of arsenic, lead, and belladonna. It was sold to noblewomen in small vials, cleverly disguised as holy water from the shrine of St. Nicholas in Naples. A few drops in a husband's soup, repeated over a few days, and a new widow could mourn with perfect, convincing innocence. Authorities eventually caught its creator, Giulia Tofana, but not before hundreds, perhaps thousands, had died. To poison in the Middle Ages was to manipulate fate itself. It was to play God with a spoon and a smile. Every banquet was a gamble. Every toast was a prayer. And as the candles burned low and the goblets clinked, death waited patiently, silently, among the silverware. By the late Middle Ages, the craft of the poisoner had become so refined, so necessary to the mechanics of power, that its trade demanded organization. Not every killer used a blade. Some wore robes, counted beads, and pretended to serve God. Let us drift now into the most unsettling shadow of all, the place where faith and poison met. Hidden beneath monasteries, in the libraries of apothecaries, and even in the corridors of cathedrals, secret networks of poisoners began to emerge. These were men and women who sold silence in bottles. They were the guilds that no king dared to acknowledge, though many quietly relied on them. Within their ranks, the line between saint and sinner blurred to the point of vanishing. Many of these holy apothecaries began their careers as physicians or herbalists. They were trained in monastic libraries, where the knowledge of plants and minerals was considered a form of divine wisdom. They learned how to heal fevers, how to soothe wounds, and how to reverse the process entirely. A tincture of monkshood could purify a body. A slightly different dose of belladonna could send a soul to judgment. Some of these men took holy vows by day and mixed venoms by night. They believed themselves to be instruments of justice, not murder, pruning the branches of a corrupt world. Church authorities knew. They always knew. But as long as the death served a holy or political purpose, eyes were conveniently closed. The papal courts of Rome, the bishops of France, even the inquisitors themselves, all at times sought the services of these specialists. A pope could not draw a sword. It was beneath his station. But he could bless a vial. And when heretics, political rivals, or inconvenient nobles fell suddenly ill after a papal feast, no one dared to speak the word poison. It was simply God's will. These secret guilds communicated through coded messages, symbols, and prayers. A sprig of wolfsbane carved into a wooden door might mark a safe house. Letters were written in the form of recipes. A note reading, "Add 2 parts of trust, 1 of forgiveness," might really mean 2 drops at supper, 1 at confession. Even the confessional booth, that most sacred space of privacy and absolution, became a place of negotiation. Guilt and payment were whispered in equal measure through the screen. But the church's shadow was not eternal. In time, scandals broke through. The bodies of cardinals and courtiers began piling up faster than grace could explain them away. Trials were held, but always in secret, always with key witnesses disappearing. Some poisoners vanished into distant abbeys, their silence bought with protection. Others, like the infamous nun of Hildesheim, were reportedly buried alive in their own cloisters, a brutal way to preserve their secrets forever. Still, the knowledge survived, because poison, unlike a sword, could not be confiscated. It lived in the mind. It was carried in prayers and hidden in the very rituals of faith. And as the church bells tolled over the great cities of Europe, those who understood their true meaning smiled, knowing that death, in its most subtle form, still knelt at the altar. This world, so thoroughly soaked in suspicion, created a society ruled by paranoia. Trust died long before most rulers did. Friendship was a liability. Hospitality was a potential trap. And at the very center of this web of fear sits one of the most tragic figures of the medieval court, the food taster. Let us return for a final time to the great banquet hall. The taster, the gustator in Latin, was the human shield between the monarch and the cup. Their duty was simple and absolute: to eat, to drink, and quite possibly to die, so that their master might live. Every royal banquet, every simple meal began with their trembling hands. Every toast depended on the steady beat of their heart. Some were slaves, their lives considered expendable. Others were volunteers, rewarded with coin, land, or favor for their incredible risk. But all shared the same fate: an existence lived one single bite away from agony. The position demanded more than just courage. It required knowledge. A skilled taster trained their palate, learning to detect the subtle bitterness of an herb or the faint metallic note that signaled arsenic or mercury. They observed the color of the wine, the smell of the stew, even the way the steam rose from a cup, looking for any sign of imperfection. But the poisons were evolving faster than their instincts. Some were odorless. Others were delayed, designed to kill hours later. Many a taster declared a dish safe, ate from it heartily, and died hours later, right alongside the employer they had failed to protect. Imagine the psychological toll. These tasters lived in a state of constant, heightened anxiety, their nerves frayed by the routine proximity to death. Some resorted to strange rituals, desperate for any measure of protection. They wore charms of blessed herbs. They recited prayers before every single meal. Some even took to cutting themselves slightly before eating, believing the poison would somehow bleed out of the wound. A few became half alchemists themselves, secretly drinking tiny, diluted poisons to try and build up a resistance. It was an early, desperate form of immunity that sometimes, perhaps, worked. But more often, it simply led to their own slow, painful deterioration. Despite their grim purpose, these tasters were often treated as the closest of confidants. A king might trust his taster more than his own physician, or even his own family. There are tales of loyalty that bordered on madness. One taster in the court of Hungary allegedly saw an assassin move toward the queen. He leapt forward, seized the chalice intended for her, and drank it down in one gulp. He collapsed moments later, his lips blackened, his duty fulfilled. His bravery became a legend, but his name was forgotten. In a world where friendship was an illusion and trust was fatal, such men embodied both faith and futility. This was the medieval court, a glittering, beautiful trap, a place so consumed by internal threats, so hollowed out by its own paranoia that it could no longer trust itself. And when a king can no longer trust his own people, his own family, his own food, he must look outward. He must find loyalty in a place so foreign, so remote, that it is untouched by the rot within. He must look to the frozen north. Our story now makes a great turn. We leave the poisoned chalice and the shadowed hall, and we feel a new, clean, cold wind. We are drifting north, to the very edge of the medieval world, to the lands of ice and iron. These lands, where the sun barely rose in winter, produced a different kind of man, the Vikings. They had already carved their legend into the coastlines of Britain and France. But by the late 10th century, their longships, those magnificent dragon-prowed vessels, turned eastward. They glided through the black waters of the Baltic and into the great winding rivers of the lands known as the Rus. What they sought now was not new land to settle. They sought new masters to serve,
and new fortunes to claim.
These were warriors shaped by hardship. They had grown up in frozen fjords, trained since childhood to wield the axe and shield with an effortless, brutal efficiency. Their world was ruled by simple, hard truths: honor, blood, and silver. Raiding was a way of life, a form of survival, and loyalty was a contract paid in gold.
So when word spread, carried by merchants and adventurers, that far to the south, beyond the endless forest and steppes, lay a city of marble and gold, they listened. The city was Constantinople, the queen of cities. It was said that the Byzantine emperor himself, the richest and most powerful man in the world, hired northern mercenaries as his personal elite guard. Men who would answer to no general, no local noble, but only to the throne itself.
The journey was long and merciless.
Imagine these men leaving their homes, setting out on this great river road. They followed the Dnieper and the Volga, hauling their heavy ships over land on rollers, past massive rapids, battling storms, wolves, and the fierce raiders of the steppe. Many died before ever glimpsing the Aegean Sea. This route, this way from the Varangians to the Greeks, became the lifeline between the cold north and the dazzling south. At the heart of it stood the city of Kiev, ruled by Norsemen who had settled there generations before. Kiev became a great trading hub, where furs, honey, and amber were exchanged for Byzantine silks, spices, and coins stamped with the emperor's face.
Many Northmen swore service in Kiev first, fighting for the Rus princes, proving their mettle before continuing south to seek the emperor's ultimate favor.
By the time these warriors, these Varangians, finally reached Constantinople, they were no longer mere raiders. They were veterans of the river wars, tempered by hardship and united by a single purpose. The Byzantines called them Varangoi, from an Old Norse word Varangyar, meaning oath-men, and their oaths were sacred. Their arrival at the imperial court caused both fascination and unease. Imagine these towering foreigners with their braided beards and furs, carrying axes taller than children, standing amidst the polished marble and perfumed silk-clad courtiers of the palace. They had not come to beg or to bow. They had come to serve. And in doing so, they would carve their saga into the very heart of the empire story. When the first Varangians arrived in Constantinople, they found an empire weary from betrayal. This was the world we just left. A world of plotting generals, scheming eunuchs, and palace daggers. The emperor, Basil II, known to history as the Bulgar Slayer, was a hard man who understood a hard truth. Survival required men who could not be bought. And that is why he turned to the north. In the year 988, after the conversion of Prince Vladimir of Kiev to Christianity, Basil struck a deal. Vladimir sent 6,000 of his fiercest warriors south to Constantinople. In exchange, he received gold, imperial ties, and marriage to the emperor's own sister. These 6,000 men, battle-hardened, untamed, and utterly foreign, became the foundation of the Varangian Guard. From that moment, they were bound by a sacred oath, not to the state, not to the people, but to the emperor himself. They were loyal to him alone, even above the empire they served. Their pledge was absolute. They swore to defend the emperor's body and his throne with their lives, to stand against all enemies, foreign or domestic. They were the perfect solution to the paranoia of the court. They were exempt from Byzantine politics. They spoke little Greek, cared nothing for the squabbles of the local factions, and followed their orders with a terrifying, unflinching precision. They were, in a word, incorruptible. In battle,
Their presence was unmistakable. Towering figures in chainmail, they fought not in tight, orderly formations, but as living storms, sweeping through enemy ranks. Their weapon of choice became their symbol. It was the great two-handed Dane axe. This was not a tool of finesse. It was a tool of finality. Forged in the traditions of the Viking North, a single swing could cleave through armor, shield, and bone alike. The Byzantines gave them a name, Pelekiphoroi. In the marble corridors of the great palace, the mere sight of these axes resting on the shoulders of silent foreign giants was enough to silence conspiracies. They stood apart from every other regiment. They were foreigners, but to the emperor they were purity incarnate, unmixed by local corruption, untempted by bribes. Their loyalty was absolute, but their wrath was legend. When rebellion erupted or enemies breached the walls, the Varangians were unleashed. They did not negotiate. They did not retreat. Chroniclers wrote that their charges fell upon the foe like wolves upon a flock. Even Muslim and Western armies wrote of their terror at facing these northern giants with axes like moonlight. The Byzantine court admired and feared them in equal measure. The Varangians drank heavily, fought fiercely, and demanded their wages in hard coin, not promises. But when the palace gates closed for the night, the emperor, the man who could trust no one, could finally sleep. He could rest, knowing that the men standing outside his door were the only men in the city whose loyalty was not for sale. The axe of the north had become the shield of the east. For decades, the guard was filled with the sounds of the north, Norse, Swedish, and Danish voices. But by the mid-11th century, a new breed of warrior, driven by a different kind of desperation, arrived to swell the Varangian ranks. The year is 1066. In England, at the Battle of Hastings, the Anglo-Saxon world collapses. Thousands of English warriors, thanes and housecarls are left dispossessed, bitter, and defeated by the Norman conquest. They have lost their homes, their king, and their pride. And so, they seek a new master. In a great exodus, these Anglo-Saxon exiles fled across Europe. Bands of them made their way across the continent, fighting as mercenaries until they too saw the glittering domes of Constantinople. The emperor welcomed them eagerly. To him, they were ideal recruits. They were disciplined, devout Christians, and they shared the northern reputation for loyalty and courage. But more than that, they brought with them a deep, simmering, and useful hatred for the Normans, who were, at that very moment, attacking the Byzantine Empire in southern Italy. The English swore the same ancient oath to serve the emperor unto death. They were absorbed into the guard, and soon these England Barangoi, or English Varangians, came to outnumber the Norse themselves. They brought with them their own traditions, their long, broad-bladed axes, their battle songs from Wessex and Mercia, and their grief. Chroniclers describe them as lions of the north, fierce and mournful men who fought as if each battle might cleanse their defeat at Hastings. The Varangian Guard was now a tapestry of northern blood. Scandinavians, Englishmen, Danes, and Icelanders, all serving shoulder to shoulder beneath the double-headed eagle of the empire. They still drank hard. They still swore loud. They still fought with terrifying precision. But they had also become something new. They had become a brotherhood without a homeland. Byzantine poets wrote that their voices echoed like thunder in the corridors of the great palace, and that their laughter shook the marble columns. They guarded the emperors, they crushed rebellions, and they even served as ambassadors. Yet among themselves they remained fiercely independent, keeping their own sagas and their runic carvings alive in secret halls within the great city.
They were men who had lost everything except their code. In Constantinople, that code found purpose once again. Iron loyalty, honest service, and vengeance, cloaked in the discipline of the world's most elite guard. For an exiled warrior, a man without a home, there could be no greater reward. Not gold, not silk, but honor, restored in the service of a foreign empire. To the outside world, the Varangians were mercenaries, but within the marble walls of Constantinople, they were far more. They were a symbol of divine protection. They guarded not just the man, the emperor, but the idea of the emperor. To stand among them was to stand as the living wall between civilization and chaos.
Their duties went far beyond the battlefield. An imperial ceremony, a coronation, or a triumphant procession through the massive doors of the Hagia Sophia. The Varangians are there, lining the way. They are draped in armor of gold and blue, their great axes resting upon their shoulders. They look less like men and more like statues come to life.
Foreign envoys arriving at the palace wrote home about them. They described these towering northerners with their blonde beards and eyes like frozen rivers, whose silence was more terrifying than any threat. When the Varangians struck the butts of their axes upon the marble floors in salute, the sound echoed through the entire palace, a thunderclap of loyalty. Inside those same halls, they guarded the emperor's private chambers, his treasury, and the sacred relics of the empire. The keys to the most important doors were not trusted to nobles or eunuchs. They were trusted to the Varangians. They slept in an antechamber near the emperor's quarters, ready to die before allowing a single shadow to cross his threshold.
When an emperor died, it was the Varangians who sealed the palace gates, ensuring a peaceful succession, or, at times, enforcing a violent one. Their loyalty was to the throne, not always to the man who happened to be sitting on it. This created a fascinating and dangerous dynamic. The empire's throne changed hands countless times, often in coups soaked in blood, and every single plot had one terrifying question at its heart. Whose side are the Varangians on? If a ruler was overthrown through a legitimate proclamation, the guard would often adapt with chilling efficiency. But if the palace reeked of treason, their axes spoke for justice. When Emperor Andronikos I Komnenos seized power in 1183, he unleashed the Varangians against his enemies inside the palace itself. Witnesses described the corridors running red as the guard carried out executions with mechanical precision. Men were dragged from banquet halls and beheaded before the marble icons of Christ. To the Varangians, it was not cruelty. It was duty. Their very presence became a form of psychological warfare. The emperor's enemies did not fear prison. They feared hearing the heavy, measured tread of Varangian boots outside their chamber door in the middle of the night. In a world where treachery was as common as prayer, they were the one constant, brutal, disciplined, and incorruptible. And they would remain so until the very end. In 1204, when the Knights of the Fourth Crusade turned their swords not against the infidel, but against Christian Constantinople, the Varangian Guard stood their ground while the rest of the army fled. They were the last to fall, barricading the palace gates, their axes cleaving through the shining mail of the Crusaders. They fought like lions, buying time for the imperial family to escape. When the smoke cleared, the great palace was a ruin, and the Varangian Guard was gone. Their oath, at last, was fulfilled. The Varangians' final, loyal act was against an army that perfectly embodied the theme of our journey tonight, the profound contradiction of the medieval age. The Knights of the Fourth Crusade, who sacked a Christian city, were part of a movement that began with the highest, most soaring ideals of faith. Let us drift back to the beginning of that movement. Imagine the first Crusader knights kneeling in stone chapels across Europe. They are taking vows, holy oaths that make them sound like saints in armor. They promise to live chastely, to renounce greed, to fight only for the glory of God and the defense of Christ's tomb. The Church blesses them as holy warriors, the soldiers of heaven's army. But once the helmets came off and the banners were unfurled on the long, dusty march east, a different truth emerged. Beneath the white cloaks and the red crosses, they were not angels. They were men, burning with the same desires they had just sworn to destroy. The journey to the Holy Land was long and punishing. Many of these knights were leaving behind debts, fading reputations, or families they were glad to escape. The crusade was not just an act of faith, it was an escape. The Church promised them salvation, the full forgiveness of all sins, and eternal paradise. But the lords and princes also promised them land, plunder, and worldly glory. And as they marched for months, starving, sweating, and killing in the name of God, the line between devotion and indulgence began to blur, and then to vanish completely. They would pray in the morning, their heads bowed in devotion. By noon, they would be slaughtering the inhabitants of a village that lay in their path. They would kiss the cross on their sword hilt and then use that same sword to loot a church before dusk. Even the chroniclers of the age, writing under papal favor, could not hide it entirely. They wrote of men who had taken vows of purity, only to be seen days later in the taverns of Antioch, drunk on sweet wine, boasting of their sins with local women. One bishop complained in a letter that the Knights of Christ have turned into wolves of greed. And yet, to the outside world, to the pilgrims who saw them, their sanctity remained untouched. Steel glinting in the sun, banners of the cross fluttering above the blood-stained streets. To that pilgrim, these warriors were the very arm of God. But to those who lived among them, they were the embodiment of contradiction. They were men who would confess their sins at dawn, only to commit them again by nightfall. Behind the sermons and the songs of holy victory, there existed a quieter, darker rhythm, the rhythm of indulgence. The Church might call it weakness, but for many of these knights, after facing horrors beyond imagination, pleasure became the only remedy. And so, the holy mask remained intact, a shining, beautiful facade of purity, covering the rot that lay just beneath. They fought for God, yes, but they lived and they often died for themselves. Jerusalem, the city of God, was supposed to be the heart of holiness, the final reward for the pious. Yet under Crusader rule, it often resembled a marketplace of temptation. Let us walk, in our minds, through the streets of the Crusader kingdom. By day, the city is filled with the sound of prayer. Pilgrims from every corner of Christendom move in solemn processions, their faces awed. But by night, the same alleys pulse with a different energy, with laughter, with wine, and with flesh. Where holy relics were sold by priests in the morning, pleasure was sold by women in the evening. The Holy Land had become profitable, and sin had become its most reliable currency. Brothels stood only a few streets away from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the very site of Christ's resurrection. Knights who had sworn vows of chastity marched into them under the cover of darkness, their red crosses hidden beneath their cloaks. Chroniclers in the East wrote of women from all nations, Greek, Syrian, even widows of fallen soldiers, gathering near the Crusader camps. Some of these brothels paid taxes directly to the Crusader lords who frequented them. Chastity, like everything else, had a price. Wine flowed just as freely. Imported from Cyprus and Italy, it filled the taverns that lined the markets of Acre and Tyre. Soldiers drowned their guilt in it, boasting of their victories and their sins in the same breath. Gambling tables stood next to holy shrines. Dice rolled while monks chanted in nearby chapels. For the common pilgrim, it was a dizzying, confusing sight. Here was the tomb of Christ surrounded by merchants, swindlers, and drunken knights. Preachers tried to warn the faithful, calling the Crusader states Sodom reborn. But few listened. Too much gold flowed through those streets. For all their vows of poverty, many knights became merchants of sin and armor. War had opened the trade routes, and with them came temptation. The Holy Land, meant to be the meeting point of heaven and earth, had become the world's most lucrative black market. Knights who had sworn to die for God now smuggled his relics for profit. Ships flying the cross unloaded not supplies, but barrels of stolen wine, silks looted from Byzantine churches, and perfumes from Muslim caravans. Some knights sold sacred icons to Venetian merchants, who then resold them to churches back in Europe as genuine artifacts. Others made fortunes selling fake holy relics, splinters of the true cross, vials of Christ's blood, or bones of St. Peter. Bribery was everywhere. Captains paid Crusader officials to overlook the sale of forbidden goods. Even bishops joined the racket, blessing ships that were secretly smuggling weapons to the enemy. The church thundered against this greed from distant Rome, but its local representatives often just took their cut in gold. The crusade had begun as a spiritual war. It had become a business venture, wrapped in scripture. If sin was their habit, then piety was their disguise. The Crusader knights became masters of appearances, publicly humble and privately indulgent. Every act of vice was carefully balanced by a public gesture of faith, a confession, a large donation, a pilgrimage within the pilgrimage. They understood the art of cleansing their image, if not their souls. And in a world where holiness could be bought, forgiveness was just another transaction. When word of the brothels, the smuggling, and the corruption reached Europe, the knights responded not with repentance, but with ceremony. They built magnificent chapels inside their castles. They sponsored public processions. They paraded relics before the people. They sinned in secret and prayed in public, ensuring their reputations remained as polished as their swords. Faith had become an accounting system, sin in one column, indulgence in the other. In the end, this dream, this grand contradiction, could not last. The crusading ideal began to rot from within. The knights who had vowed to reclaim the Holy Land were now too busy fighting each other, their greed eclipsing their faith. The loss of Jerusalem in 1187 was more than a military defeat. It was a spiritual humiliation. The Crusaders had conquered cities, but in the end, they had lost themselves. And yet, the legend survived. When the last strongholds fell and the knights returned home, the truth of their time in the East, the drunkenness, the bribes, the brothels, the profound hypocrisy, was quietly buried. It was buried beneath hymns and grand stone monuments. The Crusader knight became a myth, not a man. Artists in Europe painted them as glowing heroes, their eyes fixed on heaven, their swords shining with divine justice. It was a triumph of illusion, the transformation of blood and lust into a beautiful, enduring legend. And so, our journey tonight ends. We have drifted through a world of profound contradictions.
A world that wrote laws for runaway bells and weeping cows, yet was stalked by the silent, unseen poisoner. A world that produced the absolute, incorruptible loyalty of the Varangian Guard and the spectacular, pious hypocrisy of the Crusader Knight.
It was a world of rigid order and spectacular chaos, of soaring faith and earthy sin. But now it is time to leave that world behind. That distant, noisy, contradictory past can fade. It can dissolve into the quiet of the present moment. You are here in your own time, in your own space. You are safe and comfortable. There are no laws to be written, no poisons to fear, no oaths to fulfill. There is only the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, the simple, honest comfort of your bed. Let the last echoes of these stories fade. Let your mind become still, quiet, and clear, and allow yourself to drift into the deep, peaceful, and restorative sleep that you deserve. Good night.